Welcome back to another Swordmaster Publications presentation. My name is Ernie Lawrence. Today we're going to be studying Deuteronomy chapter 7. It's a chapter about the faithfulness of God and the keeping of the covenant. So let's get started. Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 1. When Jehovah your God shall bring you into the land where you go to possess it, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you. And when Jehovah your God shall deliver them before you, you shall smite them and utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them. Neither shall you make marriages with them. Your daughter shall not give unto his son, nor his daughter shall you take unto your son, for they will turn away your son from following me, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of Jehovah be kindled against you and destroy you suddenly. All right, so just in the introduction of this chapter here, the 7 nations are nations that are bigger, stronger, mightier than Israel. Now remember, we're talking 2 million strong here. That's what's coming in terms of the Israelites. A little over 600,000 in terms of military might for the Israelites. So these are mightier nations. They're in big, solid, stone-walled cities. They have access to giants, that kind of thing. So God is saying, look, these guys are powerful, but I'm mightier. And so when you go in and I deliver them to you, don't leave anybody. You're going to cast them out. You're going to destroy them. You're going to wipe out everything about their culture, because tied into, of course, the culture of these people was their religion. And God said that it would corrupt them. So they weren't supposed to take any any of these foreign nations for marriage or anything. They were wholly wicked. Every bit of these nations was wicked in their nature, and God was ready to have them completely wiped off the face of the earth, very much like the way that He did with Sodom and Gomorrah and the people during the time of the flood, save for Noah's family. And so it's important to note here, and I've noted this before. The idea of multiculturalism, particularly with regard to the negative parts, and I just want to again go to Daniel chapter 2, talk about the statue with the feet of iron mixed with miry clay. That was the Roman Empire trying to let everybody keep their own culture and not integrate into Roman culture, and it made them weak. And moving forward into today. America used to be a melting pot. We would take all of the best parts of other cultures and make them part of American culture, but we would get rid of all of the dross, all of the bad parts, and it made us very, very strong. So I'm not saying that any other culture besides America is bad. What I'm saying is that we used to make everything American culture. We would take the best from everybody and we would make that part of American culture. Now we are a mixing pot, and we don't put it all together into a new unique alloy. We just let everybody keep everything, and we are so divided. We are the iron mixed with miry clay now, and it's destroying us. And so God here in Deuteronomy chapter 7 is explaining, do not let anything of these people survive. You go in and you completely take out these nations, because everything about their nation is evil, and it will corrupt you if you allow anything to remain in the land. Just purge it out. And so he's very, very clear about the things that they were supposed to do, and he says, if you don't do it, then I will be angry with you, and I will come in and destroy you suddenly. Okay, so verse 5, moving on. Says, but thus you shall deal with them. You shall destroy their altars and break down their images and cut down their groves and burn their graven images with fire. Of course, we are, most of us who are watching this are adults, and we understand altars and images and graven images. All of these are religious emblems. They were places of worship, idols, and statues meant to be reverenced, and they would make obeisance to these things made with hands. But the groves might throw some people who aren't aware of them. The groves represented the nature worship, or the pagan worship, similar to, like, we might think of like Druidism in Scotland, or the Native Americans' worship of the various different spirits of the land. So the idea of groves there isn't just, hey, they've got trees, you got to cut down all the trees. It's these specific religious groves, which were sacred places to these foreign nations, and they would go to these groves and worship. And so those particular places is what God is talking about. Cut them down, destroy them, and don't leave anything, because it will corrupt you. And we'll actually see in the books of history and in the books of prophecy these groves talked about, because Israel, when the kingdom split and you had the northern kingdom of Israel, couldn't or didn't want to go down to Jerusalem to worship like they were supposed to. They had all of these groves and whatever. And then in the south, when you had periods of wickedness, they would allow these groves to grow up, and they would go there and they would worship. But then a good king would come along and they would cut down all the groves on top of everything else. So there was a special place in the mind of these pagan nations for these groves. They weren't just random groups of trees or something like that. All right, so he says we're going to destroy all of that. Everything about their, especially their religious culture, you destroy it, because you are a holy people. That word holy, of course, means to be set aside, sanctified, purified, to be set apart for a purpose. And so they were holy. They were to keep themselves apart from these corrupting influences in the world. So you're a holy people unto Jehovah your God, and Jehovah your God has chosen you to be a special people unto himself above all people that are upon the face of the earth. Now, why did God choose them? Just a reminder here. God chose them specifically to bring the Messiah into the world. It wasn't because they were stronger. It wasn't because they were better looking. Certainly wasn't because they were more righteous or obedient than any other nation. But specifically, God chose them out because of his relationship with Abraham, and because he wanted a nation that would be dependent on him, that would have to rely on him to win all of their victories. Not that any nation would be otherwise, but specifically he chose the weaker, smaller nation as an advantage, so that nobody could say that it was anything but his help that allowed them to win their victories. And so he's going to set them up, but he's also going to set them up as a beacon to the Gentile nations that are around, that aren't wholly wicked, that can look to the Jews and see, hey, these guys, there's something going on. God's going to bless them. I want to be like that. I want to be part of that. And they have the opportunity, those nations that God left. We've got the Moabites, and we've got the southern Midianites and so forth. All of the nations that surrounded but were not part of the promised land could look, and they could see the blessings and be a part of that. And that did happen for a little while. So anyway, verse 7, Jehovah did not set his love upon you, nor choose you, because you were more in number than any people, for you were the fewest of all people. But because Jehovah loved you, and because he would keep the oath which he had sworn unto your fathers, hath Jehovah brought you out with a mighty hand, and redeemed you out of the house of the bondman, from the hand of Pharaoh the king of Egypt. So again, God chose them not because of anything special to them, but because of his relationship with Abraham. Know therefore that Jehovah your God, he is God, the faithful God, which keeps covenant and mercy with them that love him, and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. So a few things here. This is a packed verse. Number one, God is always faithful. He always keeps his covenants. Okay? His covenants are conditional. He keeps them with those that keep their side of the bargain, those that love him and keep his commandments. Not any different in the New Testament. John 14:23, if you keep my commandments, then I and the Father will come and make our dwelling place with you. He's the author of eternal salvation unto those who obey him, Hebrews 5:9. So this idea of keeping commandments is not a new thing, and it is absolutely something that is part of the New Testament. Now, which commandments is important? We're not under the patriarchal law. We're not under the Mosaical law. We're not under those dispensations or those covenants. Now we're under a new covenant, a better covenant, and so that's the law that we keep, is the conditions of that new covenant. Anybody says that we don't have to keep anything, we don't have to do anything, there's no action involved, it's just believe, they're not reading the same Bible. And so this idea of covenant here is promise. It's a contract. It is a deal that God has made with them. God says, if I'm going to do all these things for you, and He already has. He's already brought them out of Egypt. He's already done amazing things. He kept them alive during the wilderness. I'm going to give you victory over your enemies. He's going to do so much for them. He's going to preserve them, and despite their disobedience, He's going to preserve them all the way up until the coming of Messiah. So these are all the things that God is going to do and has done. And He says, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to provide for you everything that you could ever want in this land of promise if you love me and keep my commandments. It's as simple as that. And then it says, to 1,000 generations. Again, you have to understand figures of speech, hyperbole. This does not mean that God is going to keep the Jews alive for 1,000 generations, because we are not anywhere near 1,000 generations from the time of Moses or the time of Abraham or anything like that. 1,000 generations, you count 40 years as a generation, that would be 40,000 years. So we're not anywhere close to that. The idea here of 1,000 is that symbol of completeness. The word 1,000 is 10 times 10 times 10. 10 3 times is divine completion. Here you have that figure of speech. If I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times, right? So we understand this figure of speech in our common language. But here He's just saying all the way through. If you keep my commandments for the entire time of the contract, I will keep my side of it as well. And like I said, it's an important one, because we're going to see that word, that 1,000, a number of times throughout both the Old and the New Testament. It's important to understand, and it has its foundation here in the books of Moses. So he's gonna be faithful. He's gonna love them, and He says also, verse 10, and repays them that hate Him to their face to destroy them. He will not be slack to him that hates Him. He will repay him to his face. So He says it twice. If you hate God, if you and loving and keeping the commandments and hating and disobedience go hand in hand. Those are the two things that kind of go hand in hand. And God says, if you hate me, if you rebel against me, I'm not gonna be slack about it. I'm gonna destroy you right to your face. Like it's not even gonna be. You're not even gonna wonder what happened. You're gonna know, oh, we disobeyed God, and now we got what's coming to us. And He does that. He absolutely does that. There's no question about that at all. So verse 11, you shall therefore keep the commandments and the statutes and the judgments which I command you this day to do them. Wherefore it shall come to pass, if you hearken to these judgments and keep them and do them, that Jehovah your God shall keep unto you the covenant and the mercy which He sware unto your fathers. Okay, so commandments, statutes, judgments. Judgments, got to keep them, you got to do them. I mean, over and over again, God wants obedience. It says, if you will keep these covenants, then I will keep my covenant with you that I promised to your fathers. And He will love you and bless you and multiply you. So these are all the things that He's going to do when they get into the promised land. If they keep His covenant, this is how God's going to treat them. So they could determine, hey, we're on the right track because look at all of the blessings. And if the blessings started to wane, if things started going bad, they probably should do some self-examination. Why is God not blessing us anymore? What are we doing wrong? And it was a very physical way to look at things. Today, it doesn't work that way. In the New Testament, God provides spiritual blessings, but the physical blessings that we get are part of providence. And so they can wax and wane, and when they wane, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are doing anything as an individual or even a congregation necessarily bad, because sometimes those physical things are sent to us as trials to purify us, to make us stronger. But on the national level, I believe that it still holds true. when you look at nations, and these a nation is one that is focused on the will of God, acknowledges Jehovah God as the creator of the universe, and generally speaking, looks in that direction, then that nation is going to end up doing well providentially, because it's keeping up with the benefits of no murder, no theft, honoring your father and mother, just general justice, the idea of the way that a nation should operate in terms of witnesses and honesty and all of these things that would make a nation great, as opposed to the tyrannical despotism that we see throughout most of the world, where the power hungry are at the top and they rule based on whim. Those nations tend to crumble because they cannot sustain on the selfishness of men. It's just not possible. But it's providential. God doesn't come down and supernaturally stir the pot or anything. But he set up, this is how you ought to live. And those ideas are presented in both the Old and the New Testament that are good ideas about economics and justice, and how the leadership of a nation should treat the people of the nation, and how judges should operate, and all of that. And if we follow it, if we follow after that biblical pattern, our physical nation's going to do well. And this is what God is speaking of. But for the Israelites, it was supernatural. It was above and beyond, so that it was obvious that when they were doing righteousness, God was blessing them. It says, and he will love you and bless you and multiply you. He will also bless the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your land, your corn, your wine, your oil, the increase of your kine, that's your cattle, and the flocks of your sheep, in the land which he swore to your fathers to give you. So they were going to have all of this bounty if they were obedient. You shall be blessed above all people. There shall not be a male or female barren among you or among your cattle. So they were going to have, basically, what's the first thing God ever told man? Live long and prosper. Be fruitful and multiply. And so, that's what he's going to bless them with, is just nobody was going to be barren. You would all be able to have children, and you would grow as a nation. And part of that is the understanding of how much of a blessing children are. To have children and to bring life into the world is one of the most amazing things that a human being can do. And so the darker side of that, and I don't want to taint this by talking about it over long, but the darker side of this is when people don't recognize that as a blessing. You've got the people who are into abortion, that they don't see the unborn child as one of the utmost blessings that God gives us. They see it as an inconvenience and are willing to destroy that life. And that's horrible and disgusting. And then you've got people, and Calvinist, I'm talking to you right now, that not only do they view these children as an inconvenience, they go a step further, because they believe that God decided before time who was going to be evil and who was going to be good, that if a child is going to be one of those evil children, that child is evil from birth, or from conception, I'm sorry, and that child that is in the womb is vile, evil, a monster, spiritually speaking, and only worthy of eternal damnation. That's worse. The physical body is temporary. It's passing. The child is, if allowed to be born, is going to grow up and eventually die anyway. So in that sense, the physical life that is denied to the child is sad, and it's horrible. And I'm not trying to justify any stretch that abortion is a good thing, or in any way a positive thing, because it's not. It's awful. But then to go a step further and say that the soul of that unborn child is a vile, evil little monster, that makes me want to vomit. And it's antithetical to everything the Bible teaches about the blessing that children are. God doesn't say, I'm going to bless you with a bunch of vile little monsters. He says, I'm going to bless you with children, the most innocent of all life. And so I wholly reject the idea of Calvinism just on that thought alone. Even if I were to consider anything else that they taught as possibly being true, if that was part of the Calvinist thing and it all depended on and was attached to that, no, I'm sorry, you're out. And you can't sustain it from Scripture. It's not sustainable from Scripture at all. So anyway, they have to read that into the Scriptures because it's certainly not there. But God continues on with the blessing. And Jehovah will take away from you all sickness, and will put none of the evil diseases of Egypt which you know upon you, but will lay them all upon them that hate thee. So can you imagine that, being a part of a nation where nobody ever gets sick? Being part of a nation where everybody is always healthy, and then if somebody tries to come against you, you're living faithfully to God, and an enemy decides, hey, I want to take what those people have. I don't want what they have by maybe figuring out their God and worshiping their God too, and maybe he'll bless us as well. But I want to go in there, I want to take what they have by force. And then the people start getting plagues and sick and stuff because they're trying to go against Jehovah, God's chosen nation. Man, that's powerful. I'd love to be in a nation where nobody got sick. I mean, can you just think about this in terms of what's going on right now with all this corona nonsense? A lot of people talking about getting sick and the fear that has come with just, I don't even talk about actually getting sick. I'm talking about the fear of getting sick. But if these guys are faithful, they don't even have to worry about getting a cold or anything, because God was going to bless them with having no disease whatsoever. That is amazing to me, the blessings that God was going to give these people. It says in verse 16, and you shall consume all the people which Jehovah your God shall deliver you. Your eyes shall have no pity upon them, neither shall you serve their gods, for that will be a snare unto you. Think about Solomon. Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. I had that wrong last night in Bible class. 700 wives, 300 concubines. And what ended up happening to Solomon? He had all of these political marriages, and what all these foreign women do? They drew him away from God in his later years. And it ended up was really bad for the nation, because right after he passed away, the kingdom split. So God says, consume them, destroy them, wipe them out, have no desire whatsoever for anything that they have, and have no pity upon them, because they are wholly wicked and need to be destroyed. If you shall say in your heart, these nations are more than I, how can I dispossess them? In other words, God, they're bigger than I am, what do I do? Do not be afraid of them, but will remember, and you shall well remember what Jehovah your God did unto Pharaoh and unto all Egypt. Remember, they were slaves back then. They didn't have any military might whatsoever. There was a lot of them, but they were just slaves. And God still brought them out from one of the most powerful nations on the planet at the time, and ended up destroying the might of Egypt along the way. So if they come up against a nation that looks mighty or whatever, just remember what God did to Egypt. Take heart. That's what they were supposed to do. The great temptations which your eyes saw, and the signs and the wonders, and the mighty hand that stretched out, and the stretched out arm, whereby Jehovah your God brought you out, so shall Jehovah your God do unto all the people of whom you are afraid. Moreover, Jehovah your God will send a hornet among them, until they that are left and hide themselves from thee be destroyed. Ooh, that's a hard one. Go King James. So he's going to send hornets among them. He's going to send the just plagues, and they were going to have the idea of hornets here is sometimes used symbolically of raiding parties. You know how the Americans fought against the British with a guerrilla warfare. So I believe that this isn't necessarily real hornets or whatever, but it's a metaphor for being harried from all sides by other nations. Oh, they're going to go attack them. There's all their military mights down there messing with Israel. Well, they're stupid. Let's go attack. And so they all go, all these surrounding nations kind of come in and take them on. That's what I believe is talking about. You can do a word search on the word hornet and stinging and related words like that, and see if all of the Bible comes together and kind of supports that. I believe it does, but The best place to look, of course, is in the book of Revelation. It talks about the scorpions and their stingers and whatever. And it's talking, obviously, there about military might and whatnot, and it's not necessarily talking about actual bugs. Think about what's going on here. We're talking about nations. We're talking about nations and military movement. A bunch of bees isn't really going to be, you could talk about the locust plague, and if God sends a cloud that big of hornets, sure, I can see where that would be problematic. But I really think that this is more of the idea of the surrounding nations, of a nation that might attack Israel, coming in and harrying them through guerrilla warfare and whatnot, and causing problems until the nation draws back and doesn't attack Israel anymore. You should not be affrighted at them, for Jehovah your God is among you, a mighty God and terrible. And Jehovah your God will put out those nations before you by little and little. You may not consume them at once, lest the beasts of the field increase upon you. This is another place where I think that the hornet idea relates really to the military harassment of a nation. The beasts of the field increase upon you here. If they were to try to go out and overextend themselves through military might, not really going to be worried too much about lions and tigers and bears and the cattle and stuff coming in behind them and taking over the land somehow. They're just animals. They're not that big of a worry. But if you look at the way that beasts are used, especially in the apocalyptic text, look in Daniel chapter 4, I believe it is, where Nebuchadnezzar has the dream about the big tree that's cut down. In the big tree, it says the birds came to roost and the beasts came for shade and whatever. And then when that tree was cut down, then they lost all that. Well, Babylon was this huge nation, very rich and wealthy, and it had satellite nations around it, that Nebuchadnezzar was actually a really good king, and he provided for those satellite nations, those tributary nations, in a great way. And so those were the beasts. And then you look at Acts chapter 10, when Peter is up on the rooftop and God lets down the sheet with the unclean animals, and Peter says, I can't eat that. Those are unclean. And God says, no, I've determined that they're clean. He's giving Peter a visual representation of the Gentiles, the surrounding nations, by these unclean beasts. And then, of course, you have in Daniel chapter 7 the image of the four beasts that represent the foreign nations, the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. A lot of the times, beasts really does refer to the Gentile nations. What would have happened if Israel got all high and mighty and started prosecuting the war by overextending itself, stretching itself too thin? Is the other nations on the outside would have come in behind them and attacked or broke off their supply lines or whatever and caused major problems for them. And I think that's what God is talking about here, not just, you're going to have problems with lions when you come back home or something like that. I think it's kind of silly. But it says, Jehovah your God shall deliver them unto you, and shall destroy them with a mighty destruction until they be destroyed. And God says, be patient. When you prosecute this war, you take out one, you build up your supply lines, you go in, you take it up, be reasonable about it. God is going to help you. God's going to be there. Don't be impatient about it. But be wise in your prosecution of this war, and go through, and you will eventually clear the land. And they do that. They do that in the lifetime of the men who left their families at home for Reuben and Gad to go prosecute this war at the forefront of the army. And they got to go home and see their families. It wasn't something where all right, wife, children, nice to know you, never see you again, because God's not going to fulfill this promise for another 2,000 years. That doesn't make any sense at all. So God is going to deliver. God is going to destroy the enemies, the wicked nations. And he is going to do this in his time, but it would be within that generation, and they were not to overextend. That's what this is. God just says, be patient. He shall deliver their kings into your hand, and you shall destroy their name from under heaven, and there shall no man be able to stand before you till you have destroyed them. And God is basically saying, destroy them so much that every thought of their existence is wiped out. And one of the interesting things about Bible apologetics is trying to find evidence in the world of things spoken of in the Bible. And one of those, I think, was the Hittite nation. A lot of people were like, well, the Hittite nation never existed. We don't have any evidence of that. They were destroyed so thoroughly that it wasn't until like the late 20th century that we finally dug up and found the Hittite nation. They had really been wiped out. That's how bad it was. And so God says, go in and destroy them. And the Israelite nation did. They, under Joshua's leadership, they did exactly what God said to do. The graven images of their gods you shall burn with fire. You shall not desire the silver or gold that is on them, nor take it unto you, lest it be a snare. So they weren't even images made out of precious metals and stuff, they weren't supposed to keep that. They weren't supposed to do anything, because just knowing that precious metal, that gold or that silver, came from a graven image would have been a temptation. They were supposed to completely destroy it. So it's an abomination. It's something to be abhorred by Jehovah God. He just cannot stand it. And so they were to completely get rid of it. It was considered tainted, ritualistically unclean, and there wasn't anything that they could do to change that. God wanted it out, completely gone. Neither shall you bring an abomination into your house, lest you be a cursed thing like it, talking about these idols and stuff, but you shall utterly detest it and shall utterly abhor it, for it is a cursed thing. So they were to completely, overwhelmingly, utterly just cast out and destroy these nations until there was nothing left in the promised land of them. They couldn't even keep, they couldn't melt down a statue for gold and turn it into coins or something else or whatever, because it was considered tainted. That's how much God wanted them to completely and utterly wipe out these 7 wicked nations. And that also is a testament to how bad these nations were. We're talking Sodom and Gomorrah area. The wickedness was already growing in the time of Abraham. And, that corruption spread throughout the land until it was 100% whole, pre-flood level. Every thought and intent of their heart was wicked. And so God brings a proverbial flood in the sense of the Israelite army, and again cleanses the land, but it's just this localized promised land at this point in time. And we'll see this type of flood thing again when we look in the New Testament and we talk about the flood there. So anyway, thank you for joining me. This is Deuteronomy chapter 7. My name is Ernie Lawrence. This is Swordmaster Publications presentation. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Subscribe, share, all that fun stuff. And I hope you'll join us next time.